Welcome to Blood, Gore, and Ghouls Horror Movie Podcast. I'm your host, Ian Van Gool, and this week I have the absolute pleasure to chat with writer, director, and producer of movies such as Space, Blood Covered Chocolate, and Bitter Tooth. It's Monty Light. I had a great time speaking with Monty, and he gives some amazing insight into the world of creating low-budget independent movies. I hope you all enjoy this one. Now let's get into it. Episode 43 of Blood, Gore, and Ghouls, my conversation with Monty Light.
There'll be food and drink and ghosts, and perhaps even a few murders. You're all invited.
And this week, I have a very special guest. I have writer, producer, director, Monty Light. Monty, what is up, man? How are you doing today?
Doing well, thank you. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for taking time out to come chat for a few minutes.
Of course.
Appreciate it.
Absolutely.
I always like to start off with obviously you make movies, you make some horror movies.
Yep.
So are you a fan of horror movies in general? And if so, what are some of your favorites?
Absolutely. Yes, I'm a big fan of horror films. I would say some of my personal favorites would be Peter Jackson's The Frighteners. That hit me at just the right time in my life. I'm a big fan of Stuart Gordon's movies. So Reanimator, Dagon, From Beyond.
Mhm.
Let's see. Probably also the very first horror film that I ever saw was Something Wicked This Way Comes, 1983, Jack Clayton's film, based on the Ray Bradbury novel. So yeah, I've always grown up with a big love of horror, and then there's the classics, like I remember, Dawn of the Dead, and Suspiria, actually, the 1977 Dario Argento is my favorite horror film. So
Oh, okay. Nice. So yeah, a lot of gory, ooey gooey stuff in there. I appreciate that for sure.
yeah.
So what made you want to get into filmmaking? What kind of started your passion for wanting to make movies and be a part of that?
Yeah. So for me, it started very young. The first film set I was ever on, I was 5 years old. I
Oh, wow. Okay.
I started as an actor. I was born in Tulsa, Oklahoma. So early on, I was getting into a lot of local like music videos and commercials, and doing extra work on a couple of things out of Dallas. And I just was falling in love with the filmmaking process, even at that age, just seeing kind of what the gaffer and the grips were doing and the director and everything. So it was about the time that I was like 16 that I was inspired to move into actually the filmmaking side of it, the directing of it. I directed my first short film when I was 16, and it was one of those things where I just felt the need to tell stories, and all of those instincts of wanting to like communicate and share my thoughts and feelings. Both of my parents were musicians, so I was always very much encouraged to be the artistic kid.
Oh yeah, that's awesome. I love that.
Yeah, very lucky.
Yeah. So your first short is that Paper Anvil?
Yes. Yeah,
Okay.
that was 2001. I was like 16, I think, when I made it.
Okay. Yeah, I was trying to find it. I couldn't find it anywhere. But I was going through your filmography and you've done a lot of shorts. So I was trying to find them to at least, check some of them out. It seemed pretty
Yeah,
hard to
I'll
find
send you
though.
the link. It's I
Okay.
think it's on a Vimeo link somewhere.
Okay.
There is actually it's I think you can find it somewhere. There's a Blu-ray of like 5 of my short films that's
wow.
out there in the ether, and Paper Anvil is on that. So
Oh, that's awesome. Okay.
it's an interesting time capsule into 2001
Yeah.
time.
Yeah, I would love to find one of those. That'd be awesome. I
Yeah.
love collecting physical media, especially like very like low budget indie stuff.
Yeah.
So yeah, to find like a Blu-ray collection of your shorts would be fantastic.
Yeah, yeah. Actually, that was Meridian Releasing that released that. They're very cool distribution company. Technically, the first distro I ever had. So yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I'll write it down and I'll go on the hunt for it. So yeah, 2001 was Paper Anvil, and then looks like you had a short or you had a video in 2009, and then a few shorts in 2017.
Right.
Um, so the first one that I came across, it wasn't well, it's a short, but it's part of an anthology movie called To
Mhm.
Die For.
Yeah,
In
yeah,
your
yeah.
segment "Woman Scorned." I was excited for it. It was the second one into the movie. I'll be honest, I didn't watch the whole movie. I wanted to see your segment of it.
Yeah.
Um, and it was I I loved it, but I was like,
Oh wow.
it's so short. It's so short. It's over too soon.
That's a that was a fun experience. It was one night. I actually co-directed that with Jennifer Nangle,
Okay.
who's a wonderful filmmaker in her own right. She does the Queen Malvolia series, and so she's a horror host and a lot of other things. So it was her script, her concept, her actors. It was
Mhm.
one of those things where I showed up and I remember it was like she had said that it was going to be part of this anthology film and everything, and I was like, great, cool. It was a bunch of people that I knew, a couple of people that I was getting to know, just sort of a fun night. I was still drinking then, so everybody was like drinking in between shots and everything. And the only thing that I remember that I actually contributed to was the suggestion of the high angle shot when she,
Okay.
yeah.
Mhm.
And then it was like, yeah, that would be a fun way to sort of end it. But yeah, that was super fun. Um, what I remember of it.
Fair enough. Yeah, the way it starts and you see like the tools on the tray, and I was like, oh, this is gonna get gnarly. And then
Yeah,
it was cool, and then it was over, and I was like, oh, I wanted more.
yeah, no, yeah. There was good, yeah, good effects team that was on that. The Hunter Johnson was the actor, the lead actor, the guy in the chair on that,
Okay.
and he was again like a great horror director in his own right. He has a new film coming out soon called Terabella, which
Hmm.
actually has Laura Jean Mamert and Megan Deanna Kingsley in it.
Okay.
So a couple of actors from my films and everything. But yeah, I remember the only thing I remember really enjoying so much about that was just getting to watch those other like directors and creators sort of work,
Mhm.
and putting my 2 cents into it. It was that collaborative spirit. I love that.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Yeah. Yeah, I plan on going back and checking out the rest of the film. But yeah, just in preparation of getting to talk to you today, I wanted to at least check out your portion of it. So again,
Yeah,
I really enjoyed it.
to die for. Yeah, Woman Scorned. That was fun. Oh yeah.
Mhm.
Oh, and my dad wrote the music for that one.
Oh,
Um,
hell yeah. Okay.
yeah. So he's written a lot of like horror scores, obviously all my features, but that one was like one of the first ones that he had written in more like recent times. So it was fun all around.
So your dad does all the scores for your movies?
He does. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah, no, it's really cool. He's a composer. He's also a songwriter. So, in Blood Covered Chocolate, you remember the song that plays like at the end and everything
Mhm.
like that? That was him. He wrote
Oh,
that,
wow.
and it was performed by a band called Hail Sagan, which was super cool to work with and everything. So, kind
Huh.
of yeah, a nice like metal band out of LA. So,
Okay. That's
yeah.
so cool then. I love that.
Yeah, again, it's like I was very fortunate to grow up with like a family of just talented artists who were encouraging me to do that because
Mhm.
it's it can be really hard when you don't have a support network. So I
Absolutely.
was
Yeah.
really blessed in that regard, and I think that it's really important, especially in the indie horror or just indie filmmaking world, to always sort of have your artists back, and be like, yeah, what you need, I'll see what I can do. I mean, you can't always give them everything, but it's like
Mhm.
anything that you can. It's always
Right.
about the resources and the passion. Yeah,
Yeah, absolutely. So going into your first feature here, Space from
yeah,
2020.
yeah.
I did get to check it out. I finished it up last night. I just didn't put a video out for it yet, but But yeah, that
Thank
one
you.
was interesting. It's low budget, space. It's in space, obviously.
Right.
Uh, Bit of a slow burn, but very interesting. So yeah, how did that come about? Kind of walk me through the
Well, that
process of
one,
that a little bit.
yeah, that one is probably one of the things that there's so much that I love and remember so fondly about making of that. But the thing that was really interesting that sort of set it all off was how that film was financed.
Okay.
Because that's my cat's tail right there. But basically, I think it was 2016. I know I'm probably going to fudge some of the details here, but I believe it was 2016. I went on The Price is Right, and
Okay.
yeah, and I won $10,000.
Oh wow. Okay.
Yeah, and I'll never forget coming out of The Price is Right and everything, and my wife was there, and I was like, "Honey, I know exactly what I want to do with this money." And she was like, "Pay off the student loans." I'm like, "I want to make a feature."
That's amazing.
So, and she was like, "Really, 10,000? That's not that much money." And I'm like, "No, I know how to do it. I
Mhm.
can make it. I can make it work." So we did. I think the ultimate budget was like 13,000. It was like, it was basically, yeah, it was my first feature, and it was obviously a big learning experience, but also the start of collaboration with just so many of the team, the creatives, the crew that I still work with, that I still have.
Okay.
That was, like my DP slash producing partner, Neil Tyler. That was not the first thing that we had shot together, but it was, obviously the first big thing, the first feature and everything. And it was interesting because at that point, I was actually also coming from a horror reviewer background. I was actually working as a horror reviewer, doing mainly reviewing foreign horror films, which was very interesting.
Mhm.
Like, did you ever see the film The Lure or True Love Ways? Those films, like that was that era of
Okay. I'm familiar with. I don't think I've seen them, but I'm familiar with them. Yeah.
yeah. The site actually that I was reviewing for is sadly not around anymore. But
Okay.
it was a massive learning experience in that regard, in terms of what was being done out there in the indie or lower budget world. So I was reviewing also a lot of found footage films.
Mhm.
And it's one of those things that it's like I love every subgenre within horror. And I find that some of them are more challenging than others. And to me, found footage is one of the most challenging, because what do you do that's different?
Right.
What do you do that is an interesting or somewhat unique spin on it? And I had seen a lot of found footage films that were the usual, like, film crew goes into the woods, encounters something, Blair
Mhm.
Witchy.
Right.
And it was one of those things where it's like I knew that the helpful part of found footage is that it can be justified for a certain technical level that you're making it on, in terms of all of that.
Mhm.
Um, and it was just one of those things where it's like, okay, what could I do that would be different? And in my lizard brain, I was like, what would be amazing and unique is to set it in outer space.
It
And
it is. It is for sure.
yeah, but it was also like, okay, you're making, a $10,000 film, and you want a spaceship? How are you gonna make that work? So that ended up being the biggest breakthrough.
Mhm.
We shot that at we shot all of the interiors for the spaceship at a studio in Glendale called Fonco Studios.
Okay.
Um, Vaughn Davis is like a special effects artist, designer, going way, way back. Like, his work was in like Starship Troopers and Nightmare Nightmare Before Christmas, and tons of other films. And
Okay.
their studio actually had a freestanding spaceship set. And it was interesting because I was looking around desperately to try to figure out where to film it, because it would be impossible at that budget level to build anything. So it's like it had to be prefabricated in some sort of way.
Mhm.
And I remember like actually going to talk to some places, where there was one place I remember I sat down and had a meeting with them, and they basically just wanted to build the spaceship set for me in essentially a closet with two missing walls. And they're like, you just put a green screen on it. And I'm like, oh, no, no, no. I'm trying really hard not to make that kind of film. It's we're not doing tongue in cheek. It's not like that. We're trying to create as much realism as we could, like Dark Star and Outland and Silent Running. Those were like the main aesthetic sort of inspirations on the film. Moon,
Yeah.
another
Okay.
one. Yeah. So it's like, how can we approximate that on a, on a limited budget? So anyway, there's a lot of like really fun stories with making that spaceship set work. And that ended up being, I believe, about half of the budget to shoot there for about, I think it was 6 days. But it's half the movie. And
Right.
then the second half of it was filmed in my bedroom.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Just with this like, I mean, because obviously you've seen the film now, the second half is all split screen work.
Right.
And basically what's interesting, and this is a testament to the really talented crew that I was fortunate, the really talented cast that I was able to have, the 5 main actors, because all of those sequences, we shot with one camera on the same background for the split screen, just changing the lighting, and they gave their whole performance to nothing, to the camera, basically, without even the other cues.
Oh, wow.
From the other actors. And it's one of those things that we shot that whole part in, I believe, a total of 3 days. So we brought in one of the actors who shot one day, like Laura Jean, the actress who played Ada. She went first, and then it was literally one of those things where it's like I was feeding them the lines, and we would just sort of, because we had very minimal access to playback, we just sort of felt what the one performance was, and we expressed that in between takes to what the other actors were, and then just read the script, and then everything else was done with the editing. So it was really an interesting challenge in that regard. And whether or not it was actually totally successful, I thought it would be very interesting to try to structure the second half of the film as just split screen.
Yeah, no, I would say it's very effective. That it worked very well.
Yeah.
Knowing all that now, like for sure, like you would think that they were all there together, doing it all at once. So yeah, it works very well. And I was gonna say, as far as just the movie in general, obviously you can tell it's a little lower budget,
Right.
but for a low budget space movie, it looks really really good. Like I was expecting some of the like the wonky, like the cardboard spaceship in with a backdrop or something like that, something you would expect from a low budget movie, but it looked really good. So the production value was very well done overall.
Well, thank you. Thank you, because it was definitely an interesting learning experience. And I think a lot of that is a testament to many different things. Like basically the talent of the crew, like I said, many of whom I'm still working with, and the cinematography from Neil, I think went many leagues to selling the realism as much as we could. And we just everybody was very conscious of what we were going for. Because I would say, like, if I were to put my critical brain on, I think what's interesting is that there are places in the film where I would say maybe it's even icily slow, glacially slow, I think is the term. But I think that it was, the intention of just like really wanting to sell the idea that these are people living for a year in outer space. So I think that is an interesting experience that if somebody's willing to take, that they're like, oh, okay, fly on the wall, kind of like limiting the that's another interesting thing, and to me at least, in independent film is kind of figuring out sort of the vision and the limitations and leaning into them for the narrative and the aesthetic. So it's one of those things where it's like we had this limited number of sets, and to really populate it with this sort of lived-in atmosphere and let the actors just sort of breathe there, I think was an interesting experiment in terms of selling the realism, since we didn't have the budget level to actually show you much of anything in outer space or anything like that, which some
Right.
people liked, some people didn't. But it's also interesting with that film that and again, not to go too much into production on every single film, but again, I just have to sing the credits of my cast and crew there, because all of the scenes within the spaceship, since it was supposed to be like sourced camera where they're like, fixed camera on the wall and everything like that,
Mm.
we had to fly out each wall to put the camera in. And
Okay.
the other thing is we only were shooting with one camera. So again, we only, could have one camera. It was one of those things where it's like you'd have these long scenes, like there's that 10-minute scene or whatever in the cockpit where everything is going kaput and everybody's in the spaceship and everything like that. So we would shoot for like 4 hours, flying out one of the walls from one of the angles. And it's like, okay, everybody, now we're going to shift the angle and do the whole thing over again.
Oh,
So
wow.
it
Okay.
was like theater in that regard.
Yeah.
Remember where you stood, everybody, and again, we had more playback on that, but it's like it was really a credit to the continuity there of what the actors were just able to remember because they were
Mhm.
that good.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, no worries about going into the details. Like, go into as many details as you'd like. That's what I love. Love talking to independent filmmakers,
Yeah.
because I like to do what I can. I'm on TikTok, so I try to do what I can to let people know about these movies.
Yeah.
But I think it's cool too now being able to speak to people like yourself and get the kind of backstory and the details, because someone could go in and watch Space and say, oh, it's a low budget, it's not, whatever, and be negative about it. But I
Right.
think bringing those details out and be like, this is what we shot it for, this is how we did it, like, it brings an appreciation that a lot of people wouldn't think of. So I'm fascinated by it. I love it, and
Yeah.
I hope that it reaches people as well to be like, oh yeah, like that's a good point. Maybe I should think about stuff like that before just being like, this movie's not good, or whatever.
Right. Well, yeah, and it's interesting, like the the journey for me as an independent filmmaker is also very much a balance between kind of the three hats that I have to like I've written all of my features, directed them, and also edited them. And that includes the sound editing. So it's one of those things where I find ways to improve each time, learning by doing, and
Mhm.
also having that kind of very very personal like connection to each like stitching frame of the film and choosing to take and everything like that, to take that sort of journey with it. um yeah, it definitely like is a test of your dedication to the story that you want to tell, to the
Mhm.
film that you want to make. And for me, it's one of those things where one of my hobbies that I love doing is I actually love running marathons, because I feel
Okay.
like marathons teach me a lot about the discipline to do that kind of level of filmmaking. So, like for instance, Blood Covered Chocolate, my second film,
Mhm.
I was editing that movie for 14 months.
Oh wow.
Yeah. So it was one of those things where it's like, that level of focus and dedication is, I find it wonderful, very, very fun. But it can also be, a head game, a mind game that you have to sort of play with yourself. It's sort of like, let's just get to this next scene. Let's try this, and you either embrace that or you don't. And again, like all filmmakers are different. I enjoy being able to edit my own material on the back end, like go through that whole process there. I definitely would love perhaps to have more of a team at that point. I think I could learn more from people who could do more, say with the sound editing. But again, I feel like I'm getting better at it each time.
Leads me
So,
into Blood Covered Chocolate, which
mhm.
I think is probably, I think, my favorite of yours. I
Mm,
love Bittertooth, but I think Blood Covered Chocolate, it's so unique and such a different kind of take on like a vampire story.
yeah,
And I love that it's shot in black and white and monochrome.
yeah.
So, yeah, how'd that one come about? What was how'd you kind of get the idea and everything for that?
Yeah, that one. So that started from a very personal place for me. Basically, I had started my sobriety journey
Okay.
at that would have been 2019. So, which was great, and it was very much dealing with confronting the demons and overcoming them, and learning to have just a different lifestyle and a different path, and realizing that, oh, these short-term gratifications of like drinking and everything, it's no longer fun,
Hmm.
and it hasn't been for a while, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So coming from that place, for me, it's one of those things where the ultimate impetus with making the story is something personal in some way, and then wanting to explore that through genre. So it seemed pretty uh, obvious to me, at least when I was contemplating, like, yeah, I want to make a film where I'm sort of talking metaphorically about my alcoholism. Um, it's very much like a vampire, isn't it? And so, it was one of those things where, starting with that, I sort of came up with Blood Covered Chocolate. It was really more a matter of telling a story about a character, like a character piece, Massimo himself, more than the plot turns. Um, and basically, I wanted to approximate the idea of somebody who is losing control, and in that sense make camera a subjective experience. And the more I started to go down that path, I was thinking, I was like, I want the whole film to feel like a fever dream, like somebody who is in the throes of becoming a vampire, of losing themselves to an addiction that they can't control. And so for those various reasons, I was like, what would be very interesting would be to play with different monochromatic colors. And it was also as a sort of indirect influence, but I mean, Nosferatu is the original F.W. Murnau
Hmm.
Nosferatu, even Herzog's remake. I absolutely adore those films. It's going to be interesting to see what the new Nosferatu is like.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Um, yeah, but it was one of those things that I realized that I was like, because this was around 20, I think it was the end of 2020 when I started to like want to write Blood Covered Chocolate, and we shot it beginning of 2021. And I realized that we were on the cusp of the 100th anniversary of Nosferatu.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
yeah, so as I was thinking about Murnau's film and that sort of era of, um, of expressionistic filmmaking, which that um, beginning of the silent film era, German expressionism, all of that is once again very much like the early pioneer of that surreal subjective experience of people losing themselves to a mania. So I wanted to sort of channel that into the capabilities of our more like postmodern sort of digital filmmaking style.
Hmm.
Um, and as I was thinking about Murnau's Nosferatu, it's one of those things that's like when you watch that film, there's a color coding to it. Are the scenes that are black and white, but they also use blue tint to indicate night, or red tint to indicate the vampire.
Hmm.
And I was like, I would love to explore that aesthetic concept more. Um, and then there were a couple of other ideas that I had just been wrangling with for a long time. Like I wanted to I've always, as you can see, like in my films, there's a lot always going on with sort of split screens, and the idea of
Hmm.
like mirrored reflections. So in Blood Covered Chocolate, it was a matter of like, I want to imitate a Skype call, with the picture in picture in a couple of places, because I found that it would be an interesting irony in the film that, similar to us talking right now, the most fabricated form of communication. I mean, it's awesome, obviously, that we're talking, but it's like you're looking at me as this, reflection within a reflection. We
Right.
haven't, as of yet, met in person. I would,
Hmm.
love the day that comes. But I was like, wouldn't it be ironic if that was the most vivid color in the film? Almost disgustingly so. or it's one of those things that it's like people lose their connection so much that it's like they're lost in the shadows, and then they come and they're on a device, and they suddenly have this artificial kind of environment that's thrown in, even though it's a reflection of what we had already seen in the film. Most of the whole time it's been in black and white or in red. And just those sort of more dreamlike kind of like coding to the film. And then on top of that, it was the subjective nature of it. And I had a producer on the film, great guy named Frank Merle, fantastic director in his own right. But he and I actually had a very interesting discussion about the ending of the movie, because Blood Covered Chocolate's ending changed 3 times.
Oh, okay.
And all of the reasons behind its change were very industrial, let's say. Because basically, not to give too much away, but I hope everybody goes and sees the film. But the original ending that I had written, was more definitive in terms of him being preyed upon by the monster.
Okay.
And Frank, the producer on the film, read the script and he's like, I think it would be more effective at the end of the movie if it's left open-ended somehow. Because he's like, otherwise I've just been watching a movie about a vampire, which is cool and all, but we've seen that.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, oh yeah, that's very true. And so that's where I, basically decided to go with the idea of the reflection. Again, that being the reoccurring image in the film. And I also decided to do everything visually at the end there. Because in the original script, like that last scene with Tien was actually had like 4 pages of dialogue to it that I had originally written. Yeah. And what's interesting is that and this is where it was all just purely industrial, and that suddenly breeds creativity, is we were filming that whole sequence with the actress that day. And basically things had stacked up to where we didn't have much time left to shoot the last scene with her in the movie. And it was one of those things where I was like, what would be more effective is if you take out all the dialogue entirely, where you just let the song play. And then literally we were able to just sort of improvise with the actors on the spot, where it's like, wouldn't it be interesting if he looks at the necklace again? Or like the way that he was just like, gesturing to his mouth, and their whole like relationship just being played out visually. It infinitely helped the film from what I was originally envisioning. So it's really important to like have that sort of improvisational. It's like once you've communicated your thoughts about what you want to achieve with the film to your creative collaborators, you then listen to them, and they can come up with much better ideas than you had even thought of.
No, it's super interesting. Like I said, I love the whole style, the story, and it makes sense now with you quitting alcohol, because it's a very unique take on addiction and addictions of all kinds, and I really appreciated it. And like I said, it's one of my favorite vampire films because it's so different from every other vampire film. So I've been trying to recommend it more, like in TikTok Live and stuff like that. When people ask like, what's a vampire movie you recommend? I'm like, well, Blood Covered Chocolate, check it out.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Because it was definitely a labor of love. I mean, all of them are. But that one in particular was me having to confront a lot of my own, demons, and really wanting to overcome them, and also wanting to take the next step as a filmmaker. Because it was one of those things where after Space, like I knew that I needed to make another movie, just to sort of prove as much to myself as to everyone else that it's like I can do something that's 180. You know what I mean?
Right.
I had done that part, but I needed to show, for myself, variety, like explore different kinds of filmmaking techniques. And there's a lot of things that I just fell in love with in Blood Covered Chocolate that I hadn't even really explored in Space. Like, for instance, the long continuous takes with hidden cuts. And yeah, that opened a lot of other doors, because I got to meet and work with Ellen Udy and Deborah Lamb, and just a lot of new fantastic actors. And that was wonderful, because they're, very much icons within the horror genre. and that I felt like I was getting more connected to the community and that history of just filmmaking. So that was fun.
Nice. Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
So that leads us into Bittertooth then. So that
Yeah.
Bittertooth is the first film of yours that I had watched. I discovered it on Mimitu through Mimitu, and I was drawn to it immediately because it has to do with serial killers, podcasting, and has Autumn Ivy in one of the lead roles. Who I wasn't familiar with her at the time when I watched it, but I was like, this lady's she's tattooed, she's covered in tattoos. She's not a villain,
Yeah.
and you know she's not a piece of shit character. So I was like, hell yeah, like that. Let's go. So Bittertooth, how did that come about? Kind of walk us through the process of Bittertooth.
Yeah. So it's interesting. I had finished Blood Covered Chocolate, and that was playing at a couple of film festivals, and it was securing its distro, getting out into the world, and there was like a whole timeline on that. And so I felt like I had reached, another finish line, and then out of the blue, I got a text from a one of the EPs, that one of the people who would end up being the executive producer on Bittertooth, basically asking me if I wanted to make a found footage horror film. And I mean, it was a fantastic offer. He was, offering a certain amount for the budget, which was huge for me because nobody up to that point, I had been my own investor. And so now
Okay.
somebody was approaching me with an investment. And the thing that was the most daunting about the film was that they needed, because it was V Channels that was the production company behind it and also one of the distributors, like because of their need to get films out there within their space, within the contract. Basically, I had to deliver the film in 7 months.
Oh wow.
And yes, and that was from writing the script to delivering the movie because there was no script yet.
Okay.
So and it was one of those things that was the offer, and I had long discussions with my wife about it, but very much wanted to take the challenge. One of the things that I was the most reticent about was that I didn't particularly want to make another found footage film. I
Mhm.
didn't want to have to go too much over repeat myself too much in that regard. Um, but the executive producer was very understanding, and he basically said like, well, it doesn't have to be, it could be a mixture of a few things, whatever you come up with, basically, empowering that creativity. And that's when I had the spark of, all right, I want to, as I had sort of been calling it, I wanted to do something more akin to source footage. So it's one of those things where it's
Mhm.
like part of Bittertooth, obviously. There are sequences that are found footage, and then there's other parts where it's like we're bouncing into the podcast, bouncing out of ourselves watching the podcast. Again, it was still following that train of aesthetic thought that sort of, I mean, it began with space, but it was there in like the Skype scenes and Blood Covered Chocolate. To me, that sort of surreal nature of who we are versus how we view ourselves, especially in this modern age, is just always interesting to me. And I thought that it would be particularly interesting with the subject of podcasters, because obviously there's a character that is put on, with a lot of people on YouTube, like a
Mhm.
lot of podcasts of that nature, who they are versus who they present, which is very fascinating to me. And then also, before I had even been approached to make the film, I had um, wrestled with the idea of, because I watch a lot of true crime podcasts and
Okay.
I find a lot of true crime documentaries, and I find it all very fascinating. Um, but at the same time, I also found it equally fascinating the obsession that we have with true crime content in this more social media streaming digital age,
Right.
where there's so much information that's being disseminated about serial killers. It's one of those things that it's like, I would say probably a flashpoint in terms of me starting to think along the lines of what Bittertooth would become was, watching several true crime podcasts on YouTube all about, say, Dahmer or Bundy.
Mhm.
And it's one of those things where it's like, if you go down that rabbit hole, you're interested to see what piece of information they give, what piece of information they leave out. Or
Okay.
even if it's the same information, how it's interpreted by the person who's presenting it. And it was one of those things where it's like, yeah, you could shape opinion by how you spin the narrative, even though empirically there is a serial killer. So with all of that in mind, it was very much a concept that I wanted to play with, but it was a tall task to be like, now write a script and make a movie in 7 months about this.
Yeah.
And it was one of those things where I again went back to that sort of runner mentality where it's like, all right, you have a deadline now, you have sort of a vague story concept, but it's like I didn't want to slow down to write a treatment even. I was like, I'm not going to do a treatment. I'm just going to write the script, and I'm going to give myself a task of at least writing 3 pages every day, just every day. And something will come of it. And so that worked. I ended up writing the script for Bittertooth in 1 month. With rewrites, it ended up being 6 weeks, which was very, very unusual for me, because before that, most of my screenplays on average I'd written in like 3 months. And so I think that actually benefited me quite a bit, because I stopped using that sort of empirical questioning side of my brain, and I just wanted to go with pure emotion, where I wanted to basically say, okay, if I was a viewer watching this, how do I make this roller coaster as interesting as possible? And the only other thing that I had to sort of work with was that I knew exactly the actor that I wanted to cast initially as the serial killer. I knew I wanted to work with Joe Altieri again, who I had worked with on Blood Covered Chocolate. And he had actually mentioned to me that he personally owned a ranch. And we were welcome to shoot there. And so I was like, all right. So I have my location.
Mm-hmm.
And so those elements started to like come into relief. And then it was just a matter of figuring out the story. And I think for me, it was one of those things where it's like Blood Covered Chocolate had been very much a character piece. I wanted Bittertooth to be the same thing, which I think that it was, a character analysis. But I wanted to shape the thrill of it more around a mystery plot, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
Information, again, being disseminated. The idea that it's like some stuff is withheld. When things are revealed, it takes everything that you thought you knew and puts it in a different context. And I also thought that it would be very interesting to have a protagonist who, at one point in the film, you don't necessarily like or you don't necessarily trust. So anyway, wrangling with all of that kind of storytelling, which was very much a challenge for me to see if I could tackle something that was so based around mystery plot tension. The film that ultimately put everything on the right track for me in terms of what I ended up writing in the story was Takashi Miike's Audition.
Okay.
Yeah. Loved Takashi Miike. And the thing that about that film that I found so fascinating, and this is what finally was the aha, was basically in that film, the lead, female character is able to get away with everything that she's able to get away with because of the preconceived notions of her victim.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And I was like, all right, that's what I'm going to do. That's what I'm going to do with the serial killer. And that's what Bittertooth, and that's what Bittertooth is basically. And then what's interesting is Autumn Ivy is incredible in that film, and she's incredible to work with. She's one of the most intelligent, articulate, just her as a person to work with um, was next level. Like she's lifelong friend, ride or die now.
Hell yeah.
And what's interesting is that she had actually like gotten on my radar through something completely unrelated. Basically, I had just, seen her um, social media work, her bodybuilding, her YouTube stuff. And I was actually doing a Zoom reading for a completely different script of a film that I haven't made yet, a werewolf script, interestingly
Oh,
enough.
okay.
And I just wanted to, like, one of the things that I love about readings is the opportunity to sort of bring actors in and kind of see what they can do. Sometimes meeting new actors that way. So I literally brought her in for, I think, what was essentially a 2-line part on the werewolf script. And this was, I think a year or so before Bittertooth was offered to me. And literally the way that she just delivered those 2 lines in the Zoom, I was like, I want to work with her. I got to remember her.
Mhm.
And then ultimately, when it came to writing Bittertooth, I was like, she would be perfect for who I want this character to be, because I want somebody that could sell the softness of a bedroom scene and then believably wield a chainsaw. And those are not easy to cast. And she could
Right.
do both. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, like I said, that was my first time, my first introduction to her was Bittertooth, and then I was just like, yeah, like there's just something about her that
Yeah.
like she just kind of steals the show. So I immediately like looked her up on social media and everything, followed her and stuff, and yeah, like she seems really really cool just with everything that she does.
Oh yes. And not only that, but like there's so much about the Ivy character that is there in Bittertooth that was her creation, her creativity, her insight into the character. For instance, because in the original script, she was written, Ivy was written to have, I believe, pink hair,
Okay.
and then in a flashback have blue hair. One of the earlier podcasts that happens there.
Okay.
And in one of the very first meetings that I had with Autumn, she proposed the idea of the wigs. And not only that, but it's like we started to go with the ideas like, yeah, we could use the wigs as a way for her to always hide,
Mhm.
essentially. And in some cases in the film, it almost seems like she's cartoonishly hiding herself until we get
Right.
to the end when it's all stripped away. And it's like that whole journey, that visual sort of cue and iconography for her character, that was all Autumn. And it was such a wonderful improvement on what was, in the script there. And my whole crew was able to bring that every step of the way. Again, that sort of collaborative process. I had, as a rule, I storyboard every single scene in my movie. So,
Okay.
like Bittertooth was all pre-visualized. This is my little trick again, is that I love to do Zoom readings of the script, which I then record, like we're recording here, and
Right.
then I'm able to take the audio of it and put it to the storyboards that I draw, and so I can literally
Okay.
do a pre-visualization of like, here, you just watch the movie, and from there, that sort of confidence of here's the blueprint of where we're going allows all of the wonderful collaborators that I have on the film set to improve, to polish the
Mhm.
diamonds. Like, well, what if we do this and everything like that? And sometimes you have to, you have to improvise because of factors that are outside your control. So, like for instance, on Bittertooth, all of those scenes in the apartment with the podcast and everything,
Yeah.
that was supposed to be in one location. We ended up having to use 4.
Oh wow. Okay.
Yeah, because we just lost the location after the first day. What was good was that we had filmed all of the scenes, like all the scenes in the kitchen.
Mhm.
Um, we filmed all of that in one day. That
Okay.
was that was one apartment, and then everything that was in the podcast was my house, and et cetera, and et cetera. But the thing is, that kind of necessity ended up being an advantage. So, like for instance, the flashback scene early on in the film, when we see their very first podcast, she has the blue hair and everything, and they're in like that bedroom. They're in uh, Genevieve's Mia's bedroom, That was our assistant director's sister's bedroom that we were just like, we got to find some place to film. And it was perfect. It was perfect because it was like, it just lent itself to this sort of ready-made, oh, here, we can utilize what we have here to look like this, this younger woman. It actually sort of fit her character very well. We were able to sort of have more fun with the lighting because we were working in a different space than we would have been if we had been in the apartment. Again, it lends itself to creativity. I think there's a phrase that Neil, my DP, always uses that is so true. It's like you could, I'm going to butcher it, but it's one of those things that it's like you can either worry or work, basically. So we never stop to opine or anything like that about whether or not this, oh, we didn't get this or it's not working. It's just like, okay, this is what we have. How do we then do this? And in my opinion, it always makes it better. It always makes it better. Once you get over whatever you think it should be, what it ends up being will be 9 times better than what you expect it to be. And that's the right attitude to have, because if you really want to, I think, especially in the indie world, if you want to try to have 100% control, you're just going to meet frustration and you're never going to get to your deadline. You just have to roll with the punches. So yeah. And there's just tons of little stories of just everybody pitching in and just bringing so much to the table. Like, for instance, Justin, the actor who played Flint, the son.
Yeah.
You probably noticed that he's been in a couple of my things. I've known him for like 20 years. Love working with him. And he actually, the shed scene with all of the little trophies in there and everything, that's all him. He had the skulls and all of the stuff, and it's like basically he just came out to the ranch and it was like, okay, I'm gonna go and film some scenes with some of the actors, take all that stuff, and you build this space. And he just sort of made that a part of his performance and his acting work. And that was everybody, down the line, just bringing their A game. Kyle, who did all of our stunt work, as well as the no masks, like he, did all the fabrication on that. He kept us all safe. Doing all that stuff with the chainsaw was super impressive, because it was one of those things, like from shot to shot, we had to know, chain on, chain off, blade on, blade off, and basically, had we not, pre-visualized it, we wouldn't be able to know beforehand and move that fast, because it's a lot of, moving parts. So yeah, I just have nothing but fond memories with Bittertooth. And it was really an interesting, sort of concentrated effort. Because like I said, we made the film in 7 months. We shot the film in 9 days. So it was just, this concentrated, like everybody basically came up to the ranch and just stayed overnight and slept there. We all just lived there for like 4 days or whatever it was to make the film. And we became like family in that regard.
Yeah, right. No, that's amazing. And that's what I love about like the indie kind of lower budget stuff is like is hearing those stories of maybe something didn't work out quite the way you wanted it to, or you didn't have the resources you needed, but you found a way to do it. Like it's like that kind of fight or flight. Like you're gonna make it happen. So you have to kind of think outside the box sometimes, and that's what I really appreciate about indie and lower budget stuff is just the work and dedication that goes into it.
Yeah.
So I'm sure yourself and all the other indie filmmakers, obviously you want to get to a higher tier, right? To make bigger movies. But I feel like once you kind of get up to the bigger budget, like it's awesome for you guys for sure. But I feel like overall it might lose a little of that kind of.
It's an interesting give and take, in that regard, because there's definitely moments where on a much more basic level, I do sometimes think it's like, it'd be really great to have more chairs on this set,
Right.
or it's one of those things that it's like everything is done with so much love, or it's like my own wife has done the craft services for all of the films, right?
Oh wow. Okay.
Yeah, which is great. I'm sure she would love to have a caterer, so like, those things. But at the same time, it there is a lot of power that comes from being allowed to do your own thing.
Mhm.
And that is only facilitated by a certain level of risk that it's at. So it's obviously like a bigger budget, a bigger risk for investors,
Right.
more creative input, which doesn't have to be a bad thing.
Mhm.
Movies are made that way all the time. At the same time, it's an excellent opportunity at the level that I work at to, or I have been working at, to really show what you can do. Where it's one of those things that it's like, yeah, what you see at the end of the day, there's only a handful of artists that worked on this. It's one of the, and then like somebody comes to me, it's like I can name, it's like, oh yeah, this was our guy who was our amazing drone op. There was, Greg or whatever. It's one of those things that's like you can see their talents because it isn't a crew of 200 or
Right.
250 or something of that nature. It's a lot of people wearing a lot of different hats. And that kind of collaborative family atmosphere, it's not that you can't still have it. It's like obviously you have your department heads. Having more resources, having more finance, I think would just allow someone to play even more, perhaps.
Mhm.
But there are also limitations where it's like, all right, we have to get this. Let's just say, as an example, it has to be out theatrical and it has to be PG-13 or what have you.
Right.
I would never turn my nose up at that because I feel like, again, there's a lot of great theatrical films that are
Mhm.
PG-13. That's a whole other style and environment to work in. But yeah, I think that it's important to have a love of the genre of horror because there's so much there. There's such a variety. It's one of those things that's like I still every chance that I get, I wouldn't say every day, but a lot of days, it's one of those things that's like I'll always be watching what my friends are doing or just track down an interesting, super low budget horror film and then watch a more mainstream horror film and just start dissecting like, okay, how did they do this with their resources that you had there? Or how did they, I'm always
Right.
learning from them, like figuring out, okay, this is how they composed shot or how they did this cut. It's research to me as much as it is a fun time. And so, it's a pleasure to always be watching other people's work in that regard. And I have nothing but tremendous respect for all of the indie filmmakers that I've met who have become friends and just everything that they do and always hearing their stories, like you say, of how they did it. I'm
Mhm.
like, oh, that's really interesting. Oh, how you got that set. Oh, how it's like all those sort of war stories. It's like, oh, you outran this cop trying to like do that because you didn't have this permit. It's like it's great, man. That's indie film. That's right there. Like there were moments like that on Driftwood, actually, where I was the producer on that one,
Mhm.
and that was the directorial debut for Neil, my producing partner, who was cinematographer. He did a fantastic job with that film, but like just I remember there was one night we were shooting in a scene in Chinatown, um, in LA,
Mhm.
and we basically found this like back alley, um, and we were trying to flag it off, to give ourselves because again we weren't shooting with permits and we were just like looking around, doing the whole worry thing, and it's one of those things where it's like suddenly, you find I stepped in a bunch of crap that was just there in the alleyway, and they're like, what is that? Is that human?" I'm like, "Oh yeah." So it's one of those things where it's like, obviously, if you had a bigger budget, you wouldn't have those fun stories. You
Yeah.
wouldn't have those
Right.
amazing experiences.
Just trying to help spread the word and have others appreciate it as well. doing what I can to help get it out.
Yeah.
So I had
And
a couple questions here
yeah.
before we wrap up. So you were on The Price is Right in
Yeah.
2016. Now I don't remember, but was it still Bob Barker or he had passed already?
He hadn't passed, but it was Drew Carey at that point.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. Which was fun. We know what's interesting is Drew Carey and I actually have the same birthday.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Is that how you got a couple bucks there?
probably. Yeah, yeah. And what's so funny is that I remember like he was super nice. In the moment, it was like they called my name. I ran up, and they tell you beforehand, like, oh, make a fool of yourself, jump around, be
Mhm.
excited. All of which I was doing, selling that energy, and then I basically just blacked out. Like it was just one of those things where everything was just like a blur. And I played Plinko, which is
Okay.
what I won the 10,000 on.
Nice.
Almost fell off the Plinko thing because there's no back rail on that thing. You get up there and I was jumping around, almost fell off. That would have
That's
been great.
fantastic.
Didn't happen, but yeah.
I wonder, there's got to be a video of that somewhere, right?
Oh yeah.
I'll have to
Actually,
look it up.
there's I don't know if it hasn't been like released yet, but it did play at a couple of festivals. There is a documentary that was made about that by one of my filmmaker friends. His name's Greg Schmidl. It's called American Filmmaker Monty Light. It's a very good documentary, despite its subject. It's a very good documentary. So he won like a best director award for the documentary. He did an excellent job with it.
Oh,
But
wow.
in there is the footage of me on the Price is Right. I think that might be one of the reasons why it hasn't been released yet, but
Okay.
maybe at some point. Yeah.
Yeah, I have to keep an eye out for that. That's awesome. My other question then was, so you were a horror movie reviewer,
Yeah.
kind of previous to getting into it. So do you kind of take that, like kind of your criticism or your kind of critical mind thinking of being a reviewer, and do you kind of put that towards your movies? So like if you're like if you make a movie and then and you're kind of editing and going through it, like do you keep that in mind of like, is this a movie that I would critique positively or negatively, or do you just kind of like focus on your kind of filmmaking experience and kind of focus on that as opposed to a critical thinking as far as a reviewer, if that makes sense?
Oh, absolutely. I think to a certain degree. I mean, it's one of those things where if anything, I look at the time of writing, film criticism and film analysis as an education for me,
Mhm.
continuing education. And I also went through a period where I was doing online film reviews and watching more movies that way. And for me, it's I feel like it's a tool in a tool belt. However, I also think that there is a bit of a danger that can come from self-critiquing too much.
Mhm.
Um, because it's one of those things that it's like if it comes from the heart, from the emotion, from everything that you sort of intuitively know from loving the genre, loving filmmaking, and dissecting so many other people's work. At some point, you just have to give it over to your heart, and
Right.
it may not be the thing for everyone. It's one of those things that it's like there's such a variety of kinds of horror that I think it hits people emotionally as an audience member on different levels. I mean, there's always that horror film that every horror fan is, or several horror films that they're ride or die for.
Mhm.
And the other thing that I've noticed that I love so much about the horror community is they're incredibly film literate just in general. Like every horror fan is a cinephile, it feels like. So because of that, they have um they have their own knowledge. They have their own interpretations of very famous horror films, obscure horror films, famous films, obscure films, what have you. So just the odds are against you to impress all of them. However, the other thing that is very, very emotionally satisfying and fulfilling is someone like yourself when you say that you watch Blood Covered Chocolate and it's something that really is dear to you now in some way as a vampire film.
Mhm.
That means everything to me. So it's like, all right, you saw it, you get it. There's tons of other people who it's not going to be their cup of tea, and that's okay. But that kind of like personal relationship with a horror film in any way is very satisfying because I feel like it's very unique to horror. Horror or maybe romantic comedies. It's one of those things where it's like, somebody has it. How many times do you see those memes? I see them all the time where they're like, XYZ horror film is my comfort movie.
Right. Yep.
And it's like that's true. I mean, that
Mhm.
is because I think that's the purpose of horror ultimately. Because it's one of those things that's like, there's always that other side of people who are just like, oh, I can't watch horror films. How can people digest that? How can blah, 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 blah. But horror is meant ultimately to be a therapeutic tool for you to understand yourself and the own shit that you've gone through or the stuff that you're anxious about
Mhm.
within a controlled, safe environment. So it's one of those things that it's like horror is meant to be a personal expression for the filmmaker. And I think in a way it's an interesting relationship to then critique that. So like being on the other side of those things, it's like there were tons of those horror films that even if I didn't personally like
Mhm.
in that regard, like I would watch the film and I'd be like, this is very well made. This is very well done. It captures this. Or there are those other moments on the other side of it where it's like, I feel like their goal wasn't personal. And then you express that. And I think that goes a long way in horror. And I have, other artists that I respect and they're always the first ones to like look at my writing or even stuff like that and be like, okay, this isn't work or this
Mhm.
needs to be improved here or this and that. And it's like you take that as a process. The younger me always was under the foolish idea of like, if it's not perfect, it's not worth it, but it's not done until it's on that screen. So it's one of those things that it's like you take the criticism and you take the notes and you see what you can use. And sometimes you can't use them at all. Like I've definitely encountered that um over the years as well, especially, at mixers in LA when you're telling people your concepts and they're being like, or the scripts that you've written, and they're like, well, why couldn't it be this or this and that and everything? And it's like that suggestion is utterly absurd because you haven't read it and you have no idea what I'm talking about. You don't take those notes, but then you have those people that you trust,
Mhm.
and like I'll never forget, and that can again improve the whole. Like in Blood Covered Chocolate, there's that whole scene. And it comes in. It's in the beginning and it's in the end when they're in bed and they're just talking about the monster, the Penangon. It cuts away to like cartoon shots, like little subliminal shots of like old
Yeah. Yeah.
movies and things like that. What's so funny is that not in the script. It was one of those things where I was editing it and I was doing the bedroom scene and the actors performed it beautifully. I was finding the best takes and everything, and I was showing it um to my team to sort of get their feedback. And literally one of the team members was like, yeah, this scene is kind of boring. It just sort of drags it down a little bit. And I was like, oh no, what can I do to take the air out of it? And I was thinking to myself, I was like, I need to cut away to something. What? And then it was one of those things where I realized, I was like, it's interesting that it's like they're telling each other about their fairy tales and everything. It's the way that kind of media influences itself. I was like, what if I just cut away to public domain footage? and, and really the place where that started was I did have an idea that I wanted, because I had looked up everything and all of that, of wanting to source Mystics in Bali because the Penangon from that film was the influence on the monster that was in the movie, in my movie.
Mhm.
And I just sort of followed that thread, and I was like, okay, this could feed into the subjective experience that he's having of just, the images that pop into somebody's head. And then I was able to have that come back at the end where it's like, and so this entire like layer of storytelling that was in that movie all just came about from somebody being like, this scene is too boring. This is one of those things. It's like not necessarily that feedback should be embraced. It
Right.
should be based, you can create from that. But yeah, it's so I guess in that regard, to answer your question in a long-winded way, yes, I think criticism is very helpful within process. Once the movie has been born, so to speak, I think you should be proud of what you've done, and then if people have their response to it, it's 100% valid. It doesn't change your film.
Mhm.
It's just how that film struck them. And another thing, and you could probably attest this too, is that I always think to myself, it's like movies once they're made do last forever as long as
Right.
they're out there. And I've changed my opinion on films tons of times. And
Mhm.
not only that, but my opinion has also grown and morphed. So what I hope is that, obviously the films continue on. And then other people discover it and they're like, that's an interesting, indie vampire film. And I think that people down the line, you hope, would start to interpret it or see it in a different way than even people first saw it when it was first released.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's one thing I've learned and come to realize over the past 2 years of doing the TikTok reviews and stuff is that something I watched 10 years ago I thought was the coolest thing ever, and I watch it now and I'm like, it doesn't hit the same. But
Right.
also the opposite, something I didn't like, 10 years ago, I revisit it and I'm like, I don't know what the hell I was thinking, but I love this now. So
Yeah.
anytime that I always want to give my honest thoughts, but something I don't like it doesn't mean shit if I don't like it. So
Mhm.
whenever if I talk about a movie and it's not something that worked for me, I still always say like just because I didn't like it doesn't mean that you won't like it.
Right.
Like it could be it could be someone else's favorite movie ever. It just didn't work for me. So and I've kind of appreciated that look, more as I speak to more people who actually make the films and get, your everything that goes into making a movie and all your experiences and everything like that. Where like, yeah, if say I didn't like Bittertooth, it's not my place to say this movie's terrible. Don't go see this movie because that's one person's opinion.
Right.
I love Bittertooth, and but regardless, like I still think it should be put out there so everyone else can find it and form their own opinion on it.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's kind of where I come from too. Is like everything. I don't make movies myself, so I should never say like this movie sucks because I know a lot of work was put into that. So it should be appreciated and still like put it out there for other people to enjoy.
Absolutely. And I think that's also I completely agree. I think that's also the difference of just sort of like me, Monty the person, and then me, Monty the filmmaker, artist, or communicator. It's one of those things that's like there are tons of movies that I privately just straight up don't like. Or I'm
Right.
like, yeah, whatever, blah, blah, blah. And of course, it's like those nearest to dearest to me would say a very different story. They're like, oh yeah, Monty's always talking about these films he hates. Or it's like, I have a tremendous love. I'm one of those guys where I hold a candle for those good bad movies.
Hmm. Same.
Even I find them very, very fun. Again, you can learn a lot from them. And the passion that's put into that, sometimes it just seems like something like The Room, where it's like, I don't know where Tommy Wiseau was coming from with that, but he's an interesting person and he made an interesting film in its own
Absolutely.
regard. Um, but yeah, I think that the negativity comes from any sort of gatekeeping,
Hmm.
or it's one of those things like, oh, this person shouldn't. It's like anybody should be able to do whatever they want and create whatever they want. And if somebody's able to deliver a film, that is huge,
Hmm.
especially at that level. It's like it's way harder. It's like I have friends who some of them have made movies and left them unedited, unfinished. I have a friend who basically worked on a movie for like 9 years with no real intention, it would seem, of actually releasing it, and sort of going down a path of let's call it idiosyncrasy, where it's like, I don't even know what you're doing with this anymore, but it feels like you've sort of lost the plot, my friend. So it's one of those things where keeping, again, that level of focus, that level of empiricism of what it is that you actually want to do with this, because I think another danger for an independent filmmaker is thinking that it has to be like some perfect magnum opus or anything like that. Um, when at the end of the day, it's important to have an actual movie, to have an
Right.
actual like delivery of it. So it's one of those things that it's like, I never expected, at the, again, that empiricism towards myself. It's like, I don't expect for Bittertooth to express what Blood Covered Chocolate expressed.
Mhm.
If I expected that, then I wouldn't be making either of them. This is something that I'm exploring here. I want to get this particular thing out of this thing that I'm creating and then move on. And that's another part of it is, yeah, it's interesting. Like the artist can always be their own worst enemy. And yes, certain people that I am friends with, it's interesting that they can psych themselves out of it,
Right.
because it takes a lot of courage to just put yourself out there. And again, on that indie level, it's like so much of it is your creation that it's like, this is what I got. This is what I'm
Mhm.
able to do. And it can be hard to then have somebody come back around and tear it apart.
Right.
But it can be equally, the agony and the ecstasy of it. And it can be thrilling for somebody to get it, to be like, wow. So, and through all of that to keep, to keep your own sense of self, to keep your own kind of like eye on the prize of, okay, I'm always going to go to the next one to improve myself, to construct the better mousetrap, so to speak. That's what keeps me going.
Oh yeah, yeah. No, you've become one of my favorites lately for sure, and I I've been a fan of all three of your features so far, all for different reasons. But I think you have something very unique and different from others that you can take a space movie and take a vampire movie and take a serial killer movie and put your own spin on it, and it's very unique, and I'm a big fan of all of them. So going forward, what can we expect from you next? Anything in the works here? I know you said
I
about a
mean,
werewolf film, but
right.
anything that you can say?
I mean, nothing definite yet.
Okay.
I think there's definitely conversations that have been had, some things that have been written, some things that I'm excited for, but we'll see. A lot of it comes down to, obviously, how these films continue to perform.
Mhm.
Bittertooth on Momitu, Blood Covered Chocolate, Space on both on Tubi, at the moment. So people are continuing to discover it and discover them. And I think people are excited for the next film. So I I will say that all I really want to do is, again, something that I just haven't done before. And yeah, I guess I can't be more definite than that. I would love to make the werewolf film at some point. However, I will say at this point I have more than one script with a werewolf in it.
Oh,
Ooh.
okay. All right.
So yeah, and I actually, for the first time in like, I think about 10 years, I actually was writing again with a co-writer.
Oh,
And that has been like really exciting. Come up with a really great, I think it's actually over on my Instagram. There's a little teaser concept trailer for it, something called Unit 666 Midnight in the Black Ambulance,
okay.
which is in the rewrite process right now. We'll kind of see what happens with it, but we just had a reading on it and it went really well. Um, and the vague concept that I will say about it is basically the life of first responders in a world where all supernatural monsters are real.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, and realizing that the true horror isn't necessarily the werewolf or the witch or the vampire, but the Kafka-esque bureaucracy of the healthcare system.
That sounds amazing.
Yeah, a bit more of a black comedy.
Yeah.
I wrote that with a guy named Kyle Gibbs, and yeah, very, very excited about that. Kyle was our stunt coordinator slash other things on Bittertooth. So he literally pitched me the idea for it while we were making Bittertooth. I was like, that sounds really awesome. Let's just finish up this shot and we'll talk more.
Yeah, no, I that sounds great. I can't wait to hopefully see that here at some point. That sounds amazing. But yeah, we'll get it wrapped up here. I don't want to take too much of your day or of your time here. So I'll put in the show notes all the where to find your movies, your links to your socials. You have Instagram, you have TikTok, obviously.
Yes, it's just sort of TikTok's new for me, so I'm still growing that. But yeah, the Instagram, I am on Facebook, and I think it's X now, Twitter, whatever.
Oh yeah, the artist formerly known as Twitter.
Yeah, that's the way to put it. The conversation formerly known as a tweet.
He's right.
But yeah, I really, you can find me on all of those, and I'm always willing to talk. So
awesome. Yeah, I'll put all the links in the show notes so everyone can find the movies and find you in your socials. But Monty, thank you so much for hanging out and chatting, man. It's been a blast.
And no, thank you. And again, like at the end of the day, I think you're one of the most important parts of the whole process. The one who enjoys the horror film, the one who, you know, preaches the good word of monsters and mayhem and blood, and just really, you know, and has sweet ass tattoos. I do have one here.
Oh shit, I love that. Hell yeah, that's awesome.
So thank you for all of this.
Yeah. I'm just a little guy. I'm just trying to, you know, to spread the word. That's it. I can't do it without you making sweet movies though. Well, so
it's a whole symbiosis then.
There we go. But yeah, again, just hang out here for a minute once we wrap up. But again, Monty, thank you so much. And I look forward to what you create in the future for sure.
Thank you, man.
I hope you all enjoyed this episode. And again, thank you so much to Monty for taking time out to chat with me. You can find Monty's films, Space and Blood Covered Chocolate. They're both streaming on Tubi, and his latest film, Bittertooth, is available now on Momitu. As always, I'll include all the information in the show notes, but please go check out his movies and show some support to an amazing person and filmmaker. Now, as for us here, there are some very big changes coming. An announcement should be out by next week, so stay tuned for that. But shout out to Ghoulie Julie for your continued support on Patreon. You can find us on TikTok, Instagram, Threads, Discord, Facebook, and YouTube. I just want to thank you all for listening. I'll talk to you all very soon. Have a great week, and stay safe out there.
Don't let the ghosts and the ghouls disturb you.
There you go. That's it.